So welcome everyone. Thanks for coming to the Tower Hamlets Trauma-Informed Community of Practice. For those of you I haven't met before, I'm Angela Burns and I'm a Public Health Program Manager in Tower Hamlets Council. And I'm one of the co-chairs of this group along with Patricia Potter, who's going to be joining us a bit later in the session. So we have a really exciting topic to cover today because we haven't gone in this direction in recent sessions. But for those of us, or for those of you that are new to the group, we get together every month, usually around mid-month on a Thursday afternoon, and we've looked at lots of different topics in relation to trauma-informed approaches, typically at a surface level, which is great. But today we're going to be looking at the kind of wider environment in Tower Hamlets and a few different examples of how that is shaped and how that relates to trauma-informed approaches, which is exciting. So you'll hear briefly from me, hopefully not too long, and we'll start a bit with an interactive component just to get your mind flowing and thinking about this topic. And then I'll pass over to two of my colleagues in the council who I'll introduce when they're about to speak. They'll be talking about different work that's been going on in Tower Hamlets over the past few months and upcoming months as well. So that's the description for today. I'm going to move on to the first bit, which is getting everyone to go on to Menti. So it's an interactive tool if you've not used it before. You can either join on your phone using the QR code that's on the screen. Alternatively, if that doesn't normally work for you, you can go to menti.com and type in the code that's on the screen. I'll also copy paste it in the chat so you can easily copy paste it yourself. And I've got two questions for you on the Menti, and I'll start sharing my screen. So hopefully, I'm going to stop sharing this one for now and move over to the presentation. So if you missed the QR code, just use menti.com and enter that code that I just put in the chat. Right, let's go over to a different window. So I have two questions for the group just to start thinking about environments. And the first one is, what aspects of our physical environments feel safe or foster good emotional well-being? So we should start to see people's ideas and thoughts come up on the screen as you enter them. Can someone confirm to me that they're able to open the Menti and people are, yes, it's working. This is good. So in case you can't recognize the image in the background, that's Victoria Park. So some examples of aspects of our physical environments that feel safe are places that are clean, well lit, comfortable, nature, wild spaces, that it's been taken care of. Plants mentioned a couple of times. Passive surveillance, interesting term. People walking around clean, not a lot of litter, calm and welcoming, quiet, or at least not loud.
Angela, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I think my colleague's waiting to come in. Is it possible to let her in, or perhaps it hasn't worked?
I don't think she is.
Okay.
I don't see anyone waiting to be let in.
Oh, that's fine. I'll let her know. Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
That's fine. Don't worry. A couple of more ideas. So tidiness again, good lighting, space. Space is a neutral word. I suppose that can mean lots of things. Bright open spaces, calming colors, plants again. Great. Thanks for those. Let's go on to the next question. Hopefully this will mean that your screen also changes. So the flip side to that, what aspects of our physical environments feel unsafe or foster stress in the way we perceive them or interact with them? Similar responses for the first two. So too many people, feeling congested, as in terms of, I guess, crowds and that. Chaos or being too busy. Places that are new. Not being able to see the sky, that's interesting. Again, too many people. Places that are dirty or cluttered or cramped. Loud. Bright. Too busy, badly laid out, uncomfortable. Crowded pavements. Too much noise again. Lighting being harsh. Alleyways, bad smells. Great. And oh yeah. Places with few people around. So almost the opposite of too many people. Vulnerability. Okay, so thanks for sharing your ideas. I feel like it's clear that there's some agreement in the room about places that we feel good about and places that we feel less comfortable in. And so that's just getting us started thinking about this topic as opposed to services, which is where we normally have our minds in, as opposed, like in the context of trauma-informed approaches. So just to remind people, especially if you're not, if you're new to the group or if you're less familiar with the topic, this isn't everything. It's not like the whole summary of all things trauma-informed approaches, but if you're less familiar, being trauma-informed involves understanding what trauma is and that it's very common in society or in communities. Understanding what that looks like and the impacts of it in people and communities. So like, what do symptoms of trauma look like in a community? And changing how we act or think based on our understanding of that, whether that's in policies or services or like the plans that we make, or also our individual interactions, and trying to prevent re-traumatization from happening. And then there's these 6 principles which come up a lot if you look into trauma-informed approaches. So there's things like safety, trust and transparency, collaboration, empowerment, peer support, addressing cultural, historical, and gender issues. So these things will all come up, I think, during our presenters' sessions, but I just wanted to point out some things and how they relate to physical environments. So it's not just the, like, physical environments are all like often shaped or planned, so they're not usually by accident, although they can be. But it's just that now that we're in a big city, so a lot of it is shaped. It's not by accident. And so thinking about like what are the roles of anchor institutions like councils and the NHS and others, and in creating those, how much do people in the community have a say or feel like they have a say in shaping physical environments? The ways that people feel like they aren't going to experience threat or harm in the physical spaces. Obviously, things like cleanliness that people mentioned, how much each other or like people in the community help each other in accessing space, and also what the differences are or rectifying differences in experience for different groups of people in a community. So for instance, like different genders, different abilities, etc., and the access to spaces. So these are all questions that you might have in your mind as you hear from people that are going to speak. Great, I'll stop there just to kind of give you that introduction, and I'll pass over to my colleague Johnny. Johnny works in public health and he's the spatial planning and health manager. I think that's your title. And we're really lucky because it's not a common role in public health teams. So I'll hand over to Johnny.
Thanks, Angela. Hey everyone. Yeah, my name's Johnny, spatial planning and health manager. I sit within the healthy environments team. So we look at all things built environment and the relationship to health. We look at things like food environment, play spaces for children, all sorts really. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Yeah, yeah, also I'm an architect by profession, so this is my first public health role. And yeah, it's a really exciting cross-cutting role. I think it's one of the first in the country that's trying to link like public health and spatial planning. And it's kind of a new thing that is popping up around the country. So yeah, I hope it's of interest to everyone in the group. But yeah, I'm going to talk mostly about the new local plan and how, like, why you guys might be interested in getting involved in the consultation. So I'll just give a quick introduction of what a local plan actually is. So it's ultimately it's the most important local planning policy document for the borough. All new development that happens within Tower Hamlets has to go through the planning process, and as part of that, our planning team refer to the local plan and the policies within it and make a judgment on whether it complies with the policies in our local plan. So it's essentially going to set out how Tower Hamlets is going to grow from now until 2036. It's going to identify how many new jobs, services, and homes are going to be built in the borough in order to support our growing population and our economy, and also gives detail on kind of where those things might go and how they should be provided. It's going to shape how places will look and feel and influence the way our communities interact with each other and the spaces around them. And it gives guidance on how development should be designed, how to make sure it's safe, accessible, enhances the environment and our open spaces in the borough, and also determines kind of, or tells us like what new infrastructure is required to support new residents that might come to the borough as these new homes are built, and what services are needed to support it. So it's got a long-term strategic overarching document. It's very long as well. It's kind of over 200 pages. So yeah, this is just a quick extract from a paper that Angela actually sent me last week. So it gave me a great introduction to what kind of the neighborhood means in relation to trauma. So the physical aspects of the neighborhood environment, such as lighting, traffic, density, noise, and green space, may either trigger trauma or promote healing for individuals and communities. So yeah, just things we spoke about in the first 15 minutes of the session. And yeah, these are the 10 policy themes within the local plan. So it's split into kind of these chapters which have policies relating to them. So we've got policies on the kind of homes that we want to see in the borough. Clean and green future is all about kind of sustainability and how we meet our kind of net zero targets as a council. Then we've got chapter 4 is people, places and spaces, which is all about design and including the design of the public realm, which I think came up a lot in our first conversation today. Inclusive economy and good growth, town centres, how to ensure the viability of our town centres. As we all know, town centres is a place where people meet, it's a place of social gathering, so kind of very important places to kind of reduce social isolation. Chapter 8 is around biodiversity and open space. So that's all about kind of protecting our open spaces. How do we enhance them? How do we make them inclusive? And yeah, I think Jenny's going to speak more about it in detail, but I believe your gender inclusive design policy sits within chapter 4. So yeah, I think that's a really innovative policy that we have in our emerging local plan that isn't seen in every local plan around. So the local plan adoption process, it takes a really long time to put together a local plan. But I think the key point is that we're still really early on in the process. The team started working on it kind of earlier this year, they had an early engagement on what people thought were the more important themes that they should tackle in the borough. Right now, they've produced like a very early draft of the plan. The consultation launched on Monday this week, and it's going to run until the middle of December. So yeah, I'd really encourage you all to take a look at the web link. I'll share this in the chat later on and via email. But yeah, it's essentially an online survey. There's also like in-person workshops based on the various themes of the plan, and there'll be some online workshops as well. And you can also like email directly to a mailbox, and all kind of representations will be considered as we push the plan forwards into the next stages of the adoption process. So yeah, we'd really appreciate any comments you can give so that we can shine a light on, for instance, kind of the importance of the built environment in a kind of trauma-informed way. And as part of that process, us as a Healthy Environments public health team, we've put together a spatial planning and health needs assessment, which is basically highlighting the importance of planning in relationship to the wider determinants of health, just giving a backdrop to how planning policies can directly or indirectly contribute to protecting and improving people's physical and mental health. So yeah, I think this kind of trauma-informed community practice is just another step of that, and we'd really like to kind of hear more about what you guys are working on and feed your expertise into the next phases of the plan. And yeah, I think it's fair to say that like all of the policies have an indirect influence on health, but these are just a list that I'm not going to go through all of them, but something that you might refer to in your own time, and also when thinking about a response to our plan. I think in terms of what we talked about at the beginning of the meeting, there's PS4, which is attractive streets, spaces, and public realm. How can streets be improved to promote active travel, but also like feelings of safety? There's Jennie's policy PS5 around gender inclusive design. What is it that actually makes public spaces feel safer and more inclusive? And yeah, there's a whole chapter 8 on biodiversity and open space. Can we or you as the experts stress the importance of open space for the health of residents as we kind of move forwards in the borough? That there's a huge kind of deficiency in open space in some parts of the borough, and yeah, it'd be great to get support on just how important that is from a health perspective from people who feed into the consultation. I'm just going to skip this because it's not that relevant. But yeah, next steps is yeah, I've put my email here if anyone would like to know more about the local plan. I'd really encourage you guys to kind of take part in the online survey, and please like highlight the importance of health of our residents as part of the planning process. There's just so many competing demands of planners around, you know, tall buildings, viability. There's a lot of things negotiated, and I think health sometimes is forgotten about within that. So I think the more people we have kind of stressing the importance of it, I think it would really support the work of me and my team. But yeah, that was just a whistle-stop tour of the local plan, and yeah, happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Johnny. That's a really useful overview of a very complex document. And thanks, Elliot, for popping the consultation in the chat. Does anyone have any immediate questions before we go on to Jennie's? Great, Elliot, come on in.
Thanks, Johnny. I wondered, you said there's a draft plan already. What are the headlines in the draft plan?
Good question. Obviously, like housing is a huge priority for the borough, and politically, it's a big issue for our mayor. So that does take front and center. We have a huge demand for affordable housing, particularly like social housing. So we are being extremely ambitious and going beyond what other boroughs within London are prescribing. We're going beyond the London plan on that. I'd say apart from that, there is a lot of emphasis on like an inclusive economy, stuff around like market stalls and things. But I mean, also what Jennie's done is like really quite innovative. If I'm not mistaken, Jennie, this kind of gender inclusive design, which was led by kind of primary research done by Jennie on speaking to like hundreds of residents, hundreds of women across the borough, and putting together a policy. Now we've also got a new social value policy, which is also very innovative, demanding that developers put together like a social value statement on how their developments kind of benefit the wider community. So yeah, there's a lot of good stuff on it. Obviously, as there is some stuff around like parking, which I think is like a very political issue, and I think we're going a little bit against the grain on that. But I'd be really interested in your thoughts on that. If you and I'm happy to have a conversation about that in more detail. Also, there is a big emphasis on like tall buildings in the plan, so I think that the location of and zoning of tall buildings within the borough is something that we are maximizing, and I think again the health impacts of that should be considered. But again, that is linked to the kind of need to build so many homes in the borough. But yeah, again, this kind of goes back to the kind of trauma-informed stuff around, social isolation. Does that increase in tall buildings? How do we mitigate that? So yeah, I think there's so much in it, but I think if we look at it from a health lens, I think there's a lot of kind of interesting ways of thinking about it. But yeah, those are just things off the top of my head. I don't know if Jennie, you've worked with the planning policy team as well. If there's anything I've missed.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the things that probably I would be thinking about is the cars and emphasis on car use, where that kind of goes against sort of bigger thinking. Am I allowed to say that? And yeah, the tall buildings, obviously the housing issue is really key. So that would be something to look at and think about. I mean, for me, I suppose it's that balance of green space with tall buildings. Like, how do we make sure there's enough outdoor green space? Because all the things that you've talked about in the initial kind of Menti meter was about the value of green space, and certainly when I've spoken to people. So I think it's thinking about how do we, if we have like a lot more tall buildings, how do we make sure that we have enough green space to sort of balance that? So those are the things that I'd be thinking about if I was filling out the survey.
Elliot, did you have anything you wanted to come back on?
Just about whether the quality of the housing, obviously the absolute number of housing is an issue, but we know that there's huge health impacts from substandard housing, which particularly blighted this part of London after the Second World War, when there was a lot of cheap housing constructed in northeast London that had to be removed. But we also know, if I remember my social architecture, that those same sorts of buildings in other areas where social deprivation wasn't such an issue, if they were built to a good enough standard, they didn't inherently result in social isolation and social difficulties. There are parts of the world that still have very high-rise buildings. And a final thought is about, we've had a large growth in population in Tower Hamlets, as you all know. I don't always understand how the planning process says, well, if you're bringing in this many thousand new residents, you will also need this many new GPs, this many new hospitals, this many new community centres. It seems that we just look at the absolute headcount for new properties, and we don't think about all the social infrastructure that we need to put in for that as well. So hopefully that will be addressed. Thank you, Jennie, really helpful. And thank you for reading a 200-page document on anything.
Great, those are helpful points. Sorry, Jennie, go ahead.
I mean, this is the opportunity now. I think the point that Johnny's making is, it's, you know, this is the chance now to feedback on that, because that's what Reg 18 is about, is being able to raise those points and make sure that they're considered. So
yeah, especially also I want to know, like, making sure that mental health is like featured as a kind of implication or consideration alongside physical health, because that is not always the case. I want to go to Emma and then Patricia. Go ahead, Emma.
Hi. I just wondered if within the plan, if there's any talk of the use of buildings that will have been, you know, things that have closed down. So rather than building new things, can we make use of things that are already there? Is that something that's included in the plan at all? Is that even considered, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not that familiar with that part of the plan, but I do believe there are kind of like retrofit first. We have a retrofit first approach, which basically means before you knock anything down, show us that you can't keep what's already there. I think like typically it's very easy for developers to get around this policy because the land values in Tower Hamlets are so high, and they can just say, well, you know, it doesn't really work, and we're going to knock it down. Also, it's that there's just far more incentives around knocking something down because of VAT, for instance. Like you don't pay for VAT on a new building. Also, like complexity of working with existing fabric. But I guess interpreting your question in another way, that we could definitely be doing a lot more around like meanwhile use of spaces that are probably going to get knocked down in 10 years time, but are just sitting there kind of rotting. So I don't actually, I did a similar presentation yesterday, and I had a very similar comment. So I'll definitely feed that back from yourself if that's okay. But yeah, I don't know, Jennie, have you seen anything in the plan around meanwhile use or retrofit?
You're on mute, Jennie.
My colleague Anna is on the call. I just wondered if she would mind, because Anna Gibbs has been really much more part of writing it. Hi, Anna. She might be able to answer these questions, certainly about the reusing buildings and things like that.
Yeah, sorry, I just joined the meeting, but I thought I'd just happy to jump in and say we have in our community and infrastructure policies, we've got mention of supporting the use of community uses in vacant or currently disused properties, and so just so really quickly, I've been leading on the sustainability, the clean and green future and movement and connectivity policy. So that's my main area of expertise. But in clean and green future, we are trying to introduce policies on retrofitting and reuse as part of an overall with a focus of reducing the embodied carbon footprint of a building, like really trying to emphasize reuse and retrofit first, obviously to reduce the environmental impact and carbon footprint of demolition and complete rebuild. But yeah, we do have some hooks about community use for meanwhile sites, but we do appreciate your feedback if that's something that could be strengthened or included in other sections.
Could I just extend it slightly? And I'm asking because I'm a school Senko, and we have a desperate, urgent need for SEND places for children. There is an enormous number of SEND children coming in now, and there is nowhere for them to go other than mainstream. And for some of these children, it's absolutely not the right environment. So I know that some schools have closed. So I'm wondering if those buildings would potentially be reopened as SEND schools, for example, rather than building new ones, because there is a great need for that in Tower Hamlets as part of the plan. So I'm asking for very selfish reasons. I do apologise. But I'm still always interested in sort of making use of what we already have rather than keep putting up new things that we might not necessarily need to do. So excuse me for my selfishness, but I'm just asking off the top of my head for that one.
Thank you. Anna, did you have anything to add to that? Or
I would just say I think that's a really good point, and a really good yeah, thank you for raising that point and that issue. I think yeah, I'm just having a quick scan through our community facility policies. Again, yeah, so we do a lot when it comes to considering the growth of population, and you know, if new development will increase population, particularly of school age children in a certain area, then we know to identify how many more school places might be needed if a new school needs to be included in a larger master plan development. But I think I have to refer back to the schools team for specific SEN facilities. But that is I think, and then reusing and reopening of buildings is a really good point. I think we could probably bring that in some more. Thank you.
Great. And then Patricia, before we go on to Jennie's.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief, although I've been accumulating things as the chat's gone on. I'm all for repurposing and reusing buildings. I really kind of support that. I do feel slightly uncomfortable about the meanwhile sites because people become attached to places, and I think we need to think about the long-term consequences of that actually you could do more harm than good if you put people somewhere while it suits the developers and then hoik them out. I think there was a case recently in South London where that's happening. I also want to kind of do a big, we've got to attend to mental health, and mental health and physical health we know interact. Poor housing can cause, kind of physical health problems, but also impact on people's mental health and well-being. And when it links to high buildings, I'm similarly like Elliot, reaching into my memory for the kind of work, Brown's work from the early 80s, and the kind of impact of high-rise living, particularly on single mothers with limited resources, that they were, kind of really not good places to be in terms of mental health and well-being. I haven't kept up with that literature, but I imagine it hasn't shifted much. And lastly, and I suspect I'm encroaching on your presentation, Jennie, I think we need to think beyond high-rise and green spaces. Green spaces aren't necessarily safe spaces for women. And so we need to be thinking about other places that people can be and communicate, be with other people, as well as the kind of big spaces. And I imagine you might be referencing the work in Barcelona, but there's certainly a lot of learning from the work that's been happening there.
Great. And on that related note, I'm going to hand over to Jennie, who is part of the Public Realm team and has been doing some really innovative work, as Johnny mentioned. Jennie, I'll let you introduce yourself properly and your work. So go ahead.
Okay, so I've got a little PowerPoint, so I'll start off. Oh, right, let's see. Can you see this okay? Is that
we can?
Yeah, is that okay? So yeah, I was brought in last year. It was actually my colleagues who had the idea that we should be looking at gender inclusive design, and they obviously made it possible for me to come and do this project, which was great. And it's really interesting in terms of just, I think what I felt at the start of the project was that any research that I did, anything had to come from women and girls in the borough. So I've started off working and doing this as a kind of co-design project. I'll just start off, excuse me, to think about what the project scope is. I think initially this project started off as a kind of women's safety project, and there'd been a few projects that LLDC had been looking at since the tragic murders that happened in 2020. However, I think because that work exists and there's already a really interesting or useful network of work looking around women's safety, we wanted to kind of broaden the scope of the project and look at what the kind of undercurrents and causes of gender inequality are and how that is expressed through the built environment and through buildings and streets and public spaces. So that is kind of looking at design as a kind of language that reinforces gender inequality, and to look at how our streets and public spaces can kind of articulate and value inclusivity in order to support a kind of broader systemic change and therefore kind of culture change. And we also wanted to look at how we could embed inclusive design from the fine detail to the big picture and, you know, imagine what that might look like. So I always have a problem. Hang on, I'm going to stop sharing my screen just a second. And I'm going to, oh, sorry. Just shut that. Right. I have a problem with moving my slides on. This has happened before.
Does it work if you hover over the bottom left corner? I think that there's a slide advance.
Well
there
done.
You go.
There we go. So to start, thank you, Angela. I wanted to look at, you know, how we kind of co-design this project with women and girls in the borough. And I also wanted to kind of bring in, I suppose, tactics and methods that I had kind of already established in my own practice, which really look at how do we talk to people, how do we engage people. So typically, if you're a planner, you'll organise a meeting in a big hall and a few people will turn up and they'll dominate the whole meeting and talk all over everyone. And I think often, as a woman, I've often left that kind of meeting feeling like I've not been heard, or I've been too sort of scared to speak or kind of contribute. So I wanted to set up the project in a way that was equitable from the start. We know that co-design works, it leads to better outcomes and ultimately better, healthier and safer places, and it kind of strengthens the sense of community. And I wanted to really kind of learn about the way that people use Tower Hamlets, and kind of ensure that this process would look at a kind of approach to collaborative design, which would focus on making sure that the people who are typically missing from these conversations are involved. So what are the blocks and barriers to taking part? Again, typically that meeting that you would go to talk about design or town planning would happen at 7 o'clock in the evening when a lot of women are putting their kids to bed or just can't get out or travel across the city because of childcare issues. So I designed the kind of co-design. I designed the process around thinking about what those blocks and barriers to participation are. So the first thing that I did was to go out and make audio street recordings, which I'm sure Angela and Johnny have heard a lot about already. But I just thought I'd talk today a little bit about why I use this process and how I've kind of developed this process of street recordings. As I said, typically your normal kind of planning meeting is about the loudest voices that get heard. And I've found over time, I've done a lot of kind of design kind of projects, and I find that actually kind of going out and talking to people on the street is a really good way of kind of, I think, thinking about kind of trauma-informed participation, actually, because often if you approach someone on the street, they've got a choice that they're going to take part or they're not going to take part. So they'll either walk off and say, no, I don't want to do it, or they'll say, yeah, I'll stay and chat. So with these audio recordings, some of them were like 10 minutes long, some of them are like 35 minutes long. People really like stayed and talked for a really, really long time. So I guess the main problem with this approach is that when you take the view that I'm going to just stop people on the street, it cuts out that choice of someone saying, oh, I want to participate, oh, I want to take part. But at the same time, comms is usually quite a random process as well. So you can't always ensure that you reach the right people through sort of social media or whatever. So this approach is using street interviews. It kind of avoids the practical barriers to participation. You don't have to travel there. There's no kind of cost of travel. There's no kind of negotiating or turning up to meetings, which could be tricky around childcare, for example. Public events can be problematic if you don't like speaking in public or you lack confidence, or you're not sure that the point that you want to make is a valid point, then it makes it really, those voices don't get heard. There's also issues of childcare, and which generally cuts out kind of people taking part in those things in the evening, because it's not something that you typically want to go to if you've got the choice between having to pay someone to look after your children or whatever. So, and the other thing about this approach is that I use a kind of approach of deep listening to participants. So typically I'll stop someone on the street, and if they are prepared to stop and talk to me, I'll kind of start with an opening question, which will be something like, oh, I'm just talking to people about their experiences of public space and how that might affect you, differently because you're a woman or whatever. And then I will kind of like listen very carefully to what people say, and I'll just respond to what they've talked to me about. So I don't know, they might talk about lighting or something like that. I'll say, oh, can you tell me a bit more about lighting? So I think this kind of process of listening to people can actually be quite a nice one. And I sort of often think, oh, if it was the other way around and someone approached me and wanted to talk to me on the street, I think I'd probably quite enjoy someone sort of really listening to what I've got to say and kind of taking it seriously. Through the editing process, what I typically do is when I record these audio interviews, I'll edit them into kind of 1 minute or 1.5 minute long clips. And those will typically be about a subject. So, oh, taking my child to the park, or busy roads are uncomfortable because I've got a baby, or, whatever those clips might be. And then you can start to build up kind of themes through listening back to those tracks. So for example, I started off doing this project by doing 50 street interviews, and then when you start to listen back to the edited clips, you start to find like themes where it kind of practically writes itself, because those themes start to become so apparent and clear because you hear them being repeated over and over again, which is really interesting. And I think the other thing about this is, given the example of the kind of public meeting where lots of people might be in conflict, and that I think is really stressful. It makes people really angry. Often, people leave feeling really wound up and kind of perhaps powerless, I don't know, or kind of feeling like they've managed to say something or not saying something. Actually, through editing these clips, you can actually bring people who've got really different points of view into conversation without actually having them meet in person, if you see what I mean, because they'll be able to, you know, you'll be able to listen to those different points of view simultaneously. So I was going to play some of these clips, but I don't think there's really time. It's maybe I would like to go on to talking about the actual design of the public space. So, but you can listen to this. I can send a link. So using that sort of initial process of kind of talking to people and kind of engaging in this process of deep listening, what many women talked about was the need for a culture shift. So thinking about kind of gender inclusivity, they felt that actually we needed to change the culture so that there was a kind of certain behaviours were no longer acceptable, and at the same time other things were kind of encouraged, I suppose. And I think the thing that came through most strongly was that a sense of community and belonging strengthens feelings for everyone. So even if you're traveling to a place that you don't know, you maybe kind of encounter people being friendly to each other on the street or whatever, and that actually makes you kind of feel safer. And that finally, the scope of the work must reflect the holistic experience of women and girls, from kind of teenage girls, nighttime safety, parents with children, design of parks and public spaces, people exercising outdoors, so the whole sort of range of things. Angela, how am I doing for time? I forgot to look before.
You're fine. Yeah.
I'm okay. Fine. Can you just give me a minute warning when you're ready?
I will. Yeah.
And so then, having kind of developed the scope of this, I then kind of collaborated with the community safety team. And again, the design of these kind of these kind of engagement sort of sessions was very much around looking at what barriers women might face to taking part and how to kind of design sessions that would feel really safe. So, for example, if somebody wanted to join one of these meetings and talk about something that had happened to them that they wanted to remain anonymous, you know, could they join these sessions anonymously, and how could we make sure that it felt safe for people to talk? So we set up this series of digital safety walks, and this was looking specifically at women's safety, and we used Google Maps, so we didn't have to meet up in the real world, and we could just use Google Maps, and people would join the call, and we would look around the borough and kind of say, you know, people would say, actually, I really like walking here. This is like a really great place to be. And I actually will walk 10 minutes longer on my journey to work so that I can take this path or something because I like walking down there. Or they'll say, you know, they would have talked about areas that felt unsafe and kind of why those places felt unsafe. So and these sessions, they were online, and they happened kind of 3 times throughout the day. So they were like at 10 in the morning, 12 and 7 at night. Again, just to build in that kind of flexibility so that people could join at times when they felt, you know, most free to do so. And these digital walks kind of built up a sense of really the things that were kind of causing, you know, making women feel unsafe, or, you know, that they'd like to change. And there was certainly, again, some sort of really specific themes that kept coming up around kind of navigating around people taking drugs or dealing drugs, which felt very unsafe. You know, imbalance of people in parks. So if you go into a park and there's like a group of even just teenage boys hanging around, even though, you know, that's what you kind of do in the park, that actually stopped women kind of feeling like they could safely kind of go in there or that they wanted to be in there. So these again added to this kind of themes that were sort of emerging. We ran some kind of listening exercises. We've run some at Count 3. We ran some with the NHS. Again, just an opportunity to sort of like hear from people about their experiences. and a survey which focused on, you know, how different places felt, again quite sort of sensitive questions, I suppose, that aimed to look at how people feel in certain places and why they feel those ways. So what we learned is that, oh, sorry, go back again. So what we learned is that the women that participated in the research for this report said they felt both safe and unsafe in Tower Hamlets. They're not in the main living in fear, but they're carrying the burden of living in a system that is not designed by or for them. Most women have been brought up in cultures that anticipate male violence, including my own culture, and perpetuate the idea that we should be fearing the kind of faceless stranger hiding in the dark. And that women and girls manage the potential of threat at a kind of subconscious level, knowing that should something happen, they're unlikely to be supported by the police or expect justice. So what emerged most clearly from this research is that serious assault, sexual assault, stalking and homicide should not be grouped under the same banner as catcalling, staring and other antisocial behaviour that is maddening and diminishes women. The former must be effectively tackled by the police and judicial systems, which need to start taking assault of women seriously, and the latter, day to day, which I say casual misogyny, like it shouldn't be casual misogyny, but that women encounter through contacts with strangers on must be taken seriously and tackled by instigating a culture change, which design can play a role in supporting. So one of the key learnings is, you know, we asked what strengthened feeling safety for you. I didn't say that right, but you can probably read it. Is number one, it was better lighting. And I think obviously better lighting is important, but also that can sometimes feel a bit like a knee-jerk sort of response, because it's the thing that people, you know, sort of say when you say, oh, what would make you feel safe? I think the thing that was the kind of perhaps more subtle but repeated theme was that busy intergenerational and intercultural public spaces feel safe, and that seeing other women makes a place feel safe. So, and then also kind of greener places also came up again and again. People talking about how they like to be in kind of green spaces and parks, etc. So this is kind of, I think, one of the really key findings that we need to kind of act on. And of course, if we kind of perpetuate a narrative of like, oh, it's really dangerous to go out after dark, and that there is a problem going out after dark, that kind of puts women going off. And actually what we need to do is, I think, really empower women to kind of take back the streets and go out after dark, because you know, seeing other people doing it will kind of build a culture of kind of feeling safe around doing that. How am I doing for time, Angela?
Probably 2 more minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. So another thing that we've learned is that when kind of women go to a certain space, they'll conduct a kind of dynamic risk assessment as they kind of move through the borough. And so it's not really any one thing that will make an area feel safe. It's about a combination of elements and how they work together. So just for an example, and it's really interesting because it's already come up in your Menti survey, this, you know, that you started the session with, a lot of the things that you kind of raised are things that we've sort of found. So seeing other women, people from different generations and a mix of cultures feel safe. Lighting makes a place feel safe. Green streets that are well designed and looked after feel safe. Benches are social spaces and make places more welcoming. So we've got to think about the design and placement of benches, not getting rid of them. Public toilets are really important. Connecting to a sense of community feels safe. Good visibility, active frontages, welcoming windows, and good connecting walking routes are all like a really good combination of things that create not just a safe feeling space, but a welcoming space that people want to spend time in. Whereas conversely, you know, litter bins, poor maintenance, unoccupied streets, areas that are kind of out of balance feel unsafe. So groups of young men with no diversity of people kind of start to feel unsafe. Seeing drug dealing and phone snatching, all of these things obviously feel unsafe. So it's about kind of, I think, kind of building in these really positive things. And I think this is not just about, this doesn't just make women feel safe, it makes everybody feel safe, and it creates better kind of neighborhood. So just to finish up, the kind of the document that I've produced kind of obviously goes into a huge amount more detail, but the kind of vision, I suppose, is to think about a safer borough, which is about empowering women to kind of use streets and take up space and know that they're entitled to do so, and educating everybody about good behaviour and how we should be treating each other. Inclusivity. So I kind of think a layer of community. So people talked about parks. The parks that felt really safe and that they enjoyed going to were also parks that had like a friends group or a layer of community where local people felt kind of involved, and that kind of strengthened feelings of safety and community. But also finally thinking about restorative space. So even though kind of perhaps women are carrying more of a burden or fear as they're walking around, actually building in restorative spaces can actually be a way of sort of counteracting that. So that's it for me.
Great, thank you so much. And I always hear something new when I hear you speak about this topic, so I'm always fascinated.
Thank you.
We've got 15 minutes left in this session, so welcome any questions again for Johnny if you might have thought of something related to the plan, or for Jennie's research. Obviously lots of nice or like positive comments in the chat about the research and the process, which I think maybe even if you're not doing research about women's safety in public spaces, it may have made you think about like, how might I involve people differently in my own space or like where I work. So maybe some inspiration, or you may want to contact Jennie for tips. Any initial questions for people or comments, ideas? Did anyone think about, or does anyone want to share other examples of how they've worked with people in developing a space? While you're thinking about that, I'll bring Johnny in. Go ahead, Johnny.
Yeah, I think I'm the same, Angela. Every time I hear Jennie speak, I pick up something new. But I thought it's so important that the space, like spaces are designed for and by the people who use them. And yeah, as a retired architect, I just remember it's just not a diverse group of people, basically a lot of upper class white men. And I wonder whether that found its way into your policy in the local plan, or whether, you know, yeah, how did that manifest into planning policy, and what are your like key recommendations around that? Like how do we get women designing the spaces they want to use, really?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. There is a section at the end of the document about kind of encouraging more diversity in the workplace. And I mean, just for example, I have never met a female developer, and I don't know anyone that has. And it's a question that I sort of have started asking people, have you ever met a female developer? And no one ever has. And I mean, you know, I think that's a really big thing, isn't it? It's like, who are the developers, who is doing this work, and again, like, what diversity is there in kind of industry and things like that. So I think those are all things that are, you know, really key, because actually, you know, well, Yeah, so it does, there is a section in the policy about kind of building that kind of diversity into the thing, and there's kind of some recommendations, but I think I've since spoken to my colleague, a sort of equal person at the LLDC, and she's talked about how I can maybe write into the document more about how to embed it in policy better. So, like, for example, how do you use the local plan as a way to measure the success of the gender inclusive design? So because the local plan gets updated like every 5 years, can you check like in 5 years time what's changed and things like that? So I haven't included that, and obviously I've got another year now actually to kind of complete the guidance, so I'll make sure that that kind of gets embedded more clearly, I think.
Thanks. Patricia, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think in some ways you maybe have answered what I was wrestling with, which is it's a fabulous piece of research. I think both the methodology and also what it generated. I think it's lovely, and I kind of have a, you know, I quite like to send all of our clinical psychology trainees to you to sort of learn how to do research in a way that really engages the people that are, you know, are going to be affected by what we do. I think it is that kind of, you know, how do we get, we've heard from people, and I think one of the things that we often hear from communities is, well, you always consult us, but then we don't see that, you know, that this being translated into, you know, my lived space or whatever it is. So and you know, so how do we hold people to account, and I guess in the sense that, you know, it's the kind of the local council, and in one way that's through, you know, the electoral process, but we know that doesn't always match. But I think one of the real challenges that is there, which is always there, is that tension between what will make a difference to people and the main driver, which is how do we make a lot of money. And I think these two things are always at you know, well, almost always, but they feel like they're at odds. That the need for a development to be profitable, and then meeting the needs of local communities. And just looping back to Elliot's point about the infrastructure, and I don't know if this is true. This is one of those sort of my hometown has been beset by a lot of developments in kind of, you know, what when I was a kid were fields, all of that kind of thing. And the developers get around the requirements to build schools and you know, kind of health centres and so on and so forth by just building the number of units just below the threshold of the requirement that they've got to then incorporate, you know, so if you're building 500 homes, you've got to have one of these. They build 450, and then there are multiple developments, so that, you know, that kind of loopholes. And I just wonder if there is thought about how the council will manage the loopholes, or you know, and I hold up my hands that it's one of those, it might be an apocryphal story and might not be true, but we do know that when money's at stake, people find all sorts of ways of getting around loopholes that are supposed to serve and protect the community. I don't expect a response. I just
I mean, I'm probably not best placed to answer that actually, but I don't know if Johnny or if Anna's around still, but yeah, I think this is something that, you know, people, you know, are bothered about. We just had a development near us where they had to provide a play park, so they made the most minimal play park, and then as soon as the children went on to play on it, there was like a thin layer of grass over kind of concrete. So they'd just taken all the rubble out, stuck it in the field, and then put the grass over the top, and it's just sort of, I just kind of, and I think, I suppose planning gets quite a bad reputation because there's no way of like holding them to account over that, I don't think, or if there is, I'm not aware of it, but it's not my area of expertise, I have to say. So
I guess for the wider community of practice, if Anna wants to come in, I'll just finish my point and then stop talking. Like it's something we're thinking about with any part of doing trauma-informed work, whether it's the physical space stuff or other things, is like closing that loop of communication, or like not just doing something and being like, yeah, that people said they wanted this, so that's what we're doing, and never checking like, are we on the right track, or you know. So yeah, over to Anna if you wanted to add anything to what Jennie was saying.
Oh yeah, no, I just thought I'd just add that you make a really good point, and especially when money's involved, that is sort of one of the fundamental difficulties I think of planning is trying to make sure these things happen. But there was a really interesting case, I'm not sure if anyone's been following, in Greenwich recently, of a building which was delivered with very, very different the final product looked very different from what was agreed and consented at the planning application stage. Green space hadn't been delivered, parking had been delivered which hadn't been permitted, all the room sizes were different, and that actually has now been issued an order to be demolished by Greenwich Council. So yeah, it's notable because it's unusual that councils actually take the step to hold developers to account, but it is, I think, quite interesting that we're seeing that. Obviously that then has implications for the poor residents who had already moved into the building, so whether or not it was the correct step, I think it's up for debate. But no, I hear you, that's the difficult one. But yeah, we try and work closely with schools teams and our Section 106 and SIL teams as well, to try and do our utmost to make sure that what is the required infrastructure is delivered. But yeah, it is a struggle.
Thank you. It's a hard question to answer. We've got a hand from, is it OK? I may be pronouncing your name wrong, sorry.
That's all right, don't worry, Angela. I just have a question. Actually, it's not a question, a little bit question, a little bit comment. It was a very lovely project. I really like watching and listening what you're saying, Jennie. Just the question is, are you planning to extend this in different boroughs? And if you do, or if you want to extend in any way, how can we take part? I mean, I love to take part in that kind of project, is because I'm a parent and I had a very, very difficult time finding childcare and everything. I have so much to share. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like this project has just been, I've been asked to do it just for Tower Hamlets, but I know that I think Newham have got a kind of gender inclusive element in their local plan, and I think some other boroughs are looking at kind of gender inclusivity, and it's and I think the GLA have also been looking at the GLA have kind of made a piece of research already about kind of but focusing more on kind of safety, I think. But so it's something that's quite current. I mean, what's been so amazing actually about doing this work is it feels like it's a really evolving conversation. So other people, you know, there's a number of other women that are kind of doing similar bits of research, and we've been sort of just to see how it's moved from a kind of thinking just about safety to thinking much more about like, well, what would inclusive design look like, and what would that feel like to live in a city that really was genuinely had input from both men and women. And it sounds really, I don't know, sometimes I think, oh, it sounds so abstract, you know, just talking about men and women in this kind of way. But I think it's more about thinking about the history of how, you know, historically, you know, as Johnny was saying, there's like a really specific group of people who have designed, and that's the kind of legacy that that our generation kind of inherits in a way. So how do you kind of think about things differently, and what do we want to imagine for the future, and how do we imagine that, which I think is a really exciting sort of proposition, really, to even think about what that might look like. Or so yeah, so it's definitely an evolving conversation.
Thanks. We had a question in the chat about considering perspectives of people who are transgender. I don't know, we've got only 2 minutes left, so I'll let you answer that question. But just to note in the chat that I've put the link to the evaluation form. I'm going to just post it again for good measure. Please share your feedback about the session and any ideas for future ones. And if you have thoughts about a session that you want to lead on, or an idea that you want people to feedback on, this is a great place for it if it's relevant to trauma-informed spaces or things in Tower Hamlets. Jennie, I'll go back to you with the question that was in the chat, and then we'll close the session.
Yeah, I mean, in the kind of document, I've talked about women, girls, and gender diversity, because I think actually the work does apply, it does have that kind of scope to apply to the trans community. I haven't done any specific work with sexual or gender identity, but the research has obviously been open to anybody who's wanted to participate. So I think it's a kind of difficult, I mean, it's obviously a kind of complex sort of area to look in, and I think really the sort of starting point of the project is it's using women and girls, or the experience of women and girls, to model a different city. So at any given point in her life, a woman her body's kind of doing different things or behaving in different ways, whether through pregnancy or menopause, I would say.
Pushing a stroller.
Yeah, exactly.
Or whatever you guys call it here.
So I think it's kind of rather than seeing this as, because it does seem a bit abstract to kind of say, oh, this is about women because women have a kind of biological difference, but it's more about saying women have all of these different points in their lives where their bodies are kind of in transition, and that actually we can use that to model a more diverse experience. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's kind of the starting point that I've taken.
Thank you. And I guess for colleagues who want to make sure that that's reflected in the plan, please do participate in the consultation or encourage people and encourage service users, members of the community to also participate. It's open to anyone. Thanks everyone for joining today. I'm going to bring the session to a close. Thank you so much to Johnny and Jennie for your great presentations. I'll get
Anna.
Oh, yes, and thanks for coming and answering difficult questions. I'll share the slides and the links and the recordings when they're all available and ready to be shared. But thank you, and stay tuned for more information about our next event in December. Nice to see you all, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. All right, bye.
Thanks.